Now, I think it's pretty safe to say that when we examine the two brands that are a part of Disney, both Star Wars and Marvel have been destroyed and tarnished quite equally by Kathleen Kennedy and Kevin Feige as of late, and exactly what direction they do plan to take things with both brands throughout the rest of the 2020s. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future updates. You can also follow me at Mike01. I thank you also very much for the great and kind support. So, the biggest problem of all right now has a lot to do with director Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, the director of the upcoming REY Star Wars movie. Other people like to call it the New Jedi Order film, or simply the 2026 Star Wars movie, alright? Now, what's interesting about all this has a lot to do with what's been going on behind the scenes over at Lucasfilm, over at Disney, and everything revolving around Kathleen Kennedy, Bob Iger, and Sharmeen. Now, one thing about this REY-focused Star Wars film that is a complete disgrace to George Lucas has a lot to do with the overall story, the approach to the, of course, upcoming Star Wars film, and exactly what's going on behind the overall, direction of this film. Now, one thing about all of this is that we know that Kathleen Kennedy is not going to stop. This is a specific type of producer that has no boundaries when it comes to upsetting an audience without having any kind of remorse in the process. So what's interesting about this further has a lot to do with what Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy recently did to George Lucas recently about the upcoming REY Star Wars movie script, and exactly how it involves the Skywalker legacy getting tarnished even further. Let's get into it. Now, with Disney actively involved in full damage control for all divisions over at Disney, one significant development has to do with director Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy of the upcoming REY movie for Star Wars. One crucial update to this ongoing drama is that Sharmeen got involved in, of course, behind the scenes over at Lucasfilm. As it turns out, when Kathleen Kennedy and Bob Iger approved to move forward with the REY-focused Star Wars movie, along with Sharmeen calling the shots on many parts of the storyline that were approved by Stephen Knight, the writer, they consulted with George Lucas in one of Lucasfilm's recent meetings about the direction of the script as they add the final touches. George had many issues, as it turns out, with the direction of the story and how REY was being used in the film. Lucas demanded that the Skywalker should be inserted into the script somehow, some way, such as characters like Anakin, Luke, or even Ben Solo. Most notably, of course, in the form of Force ghosts. Shockingly, Sharmeen got into an argument with George in one of the meetings that took place just a number of weeks ago, after they were all reviewing the final touches of the script to make matters worse of this situation. After this intense argument between George and the rest that are leading the REY film, this recently led to some rapid script changes that are actually even excluding any significant references to characters like Luke, Anakin, or even Ben Solo. These final touches and changes that are happening right now as a response to the recent meeting that went sour, where George Lucas was surprised that the Skywalker legacy was getting so mistreated that Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy figured why even reference the characters at all. She turned to actually Stephen Knight, the writer of the film, and ran things over with him on a new approach to handle the REY character where dialogue with the Skywalkers would no longer be mentioned, and instead will only be addressed in a vague fashion symbolically. Reportedly, Lucas wants no more interactions with the creatives behind the REY Star Wars film. This involves Stephen Knight and Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, that is now being discussed by Kathleen Kennedy to turn into an entire new trilogy. It turns out it was an entire new trilogy all along that was pre-planned, but starting off with one movie to see if it's going to be a success or not. It turns out it was true that the announcement of the Mandalorian and Grogu Star Wars movie was to water down the drama and backlash from fans over the REY Star Wars film, and was indeed a strategy that was actually instructed between both Sharmeen and Kathleen Kennedy, as Kennedy plans to make Sharmeen a very prominent director, as much as Dave Filoni with upcoming Star Wars projects. Now, surprisingly, this is why it has been taking extra time for both Stephen and Sharmeen to provide the final touches for the script in recent weeks since the strikes came to a conclusion, such as the actors and writer strikes. Now, guys, let me just pause here quick before I get to one of the big conclusions about all of this, is that We know that Lucasfilm is in turmoil. We know that Lucasfilm is a failing brand or division over at Disney, and it's not looking good for this year. It's most certainly not looking good for 2025 either, and what they plan to do with an Acolyte Season 2 and really expanding that side of the story. But what's really offensive here is how basically these arguments that rise in this recent meeting that took place between Kathleen Kennedy, George Lucas, Stephen Knight, Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy, and some of the other Lucasfilm Story Group members, is that it led to an argument about the Skywalkers being so excluded from the story. This is why Adam Driver confirmed just a number of days ago that he is not involved with anything Star Wars moving onwards, let alone anything Lucasfilm related in any kind of minor way possible. So, in response to this overall drama, Sharmeen decided to run things over with, Stephen Knight to exclude all the dialogue related to the Skywalkers or the Skywalker legacy / bloodline, and instead to only address them in a symbolic fashion. This means basically the Skywalkers are only going to be addressed in a very vague, very murky way in the overall movie, to the point where it's really not going to be about the Skywalkers period at all. So, let's move on. Now, on top of this, it all has to do with the excluding of all references of the Skywalkers and their bloodline and only addressing them in vague ways that actually bother George Lucas now. Sharmeen is also getting ready to make another major statement about the beginning, of course, March, of that overall Star Wars movie and details of the story, as this is, of course, when they plan to finish the script entirely after the recent changes that were approved by Kathleen Kennedy after the George Lucas situation, to rid of any major references of characters like Luke, Anakin, or Ben. Now again, this is another prime example of how incompetent Kathleen Kennedy really is and how deliberate her actions really are against Star Wars fans. Now, I'm completely over Star Wars. I have no hope about this franchise. Even for the Mandalorian and Grogu Star Wars movie, it's gotten to the point where Star Wars is like a toxic relationship, right? It's like a dangling of the carrot. You think things are going to turn around, and they don't. And I think at the end of the day, this is basically another pinpoint representation that Kathleen Kennedy is trying to just spew out better news by using the Mandalorian and Grogu film to kind of overshine the Rey drama, which is quite hilarious, the fact that this was all deliberate as well behind the scenes. So, again, the fact that she's trying to make Sharmeen as big of a director as Dave Filoni, as big as of a creative over at Lucasfilm, to eventually turn this into a Rey Star Wars trilogy, quote-unquote, or a New Jedi Order trilogy that will involve the character of Rey Skywalker by name, is a disgrace to the Skywalker lineage. It's a disgrace also to George Lucas and what he actually built back in 1977. So overall, I would like to hear your overall take on this below in the comments, and if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel, and I will catch you guys later.